Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, July 11th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about Joe Biden and this group that is warning him and the Democratic Party that the American public can't name a single issue that Joe Biden seems to be holding a lot of importance on, seems to be in a position where the rest of the country is largely clueless as to what him and his administration is doing. Now, why is this important? Well, it is, of course, super important that the administration is very clear and very transparent about what they're doing, but if the American public can't find anything notable, maybe the stimulus checks, maybe in the future the infrastructure bill, but if the American public can't name many major pieces of legislation, the Biden Democratic Party at this point has nothing to run on in 2022. You see, when they won the trifecta, this was a major development for the Democratic Party. This was honestly the biggest thing to happen for them in the 2020 election. While they lost statewide on many ways, they were able to reclaim control of the Senate, House, and win control of the Senate and the White House, and then retain control of the House of Representatives. And everyone was, at one point, I would say, on the Democratic side, hopeful about what they could do with this newfound trifecta. But it was soon realized that due to the filibuster, many things seemed to be impossible, or at least close to it. And with this throttling of the Democratic Party, largely done in part by the GOP, but also due to many members of the United States Senate, which seem to be reluctant about changing the filibuster, Biden and the Democrats are in a very tricky position. Because they don't know about the president's accomplishments, as they put it, according to this Politico article and Fox News, this makes it very difficult for the Democratic Party to go into the midterm elections and say, we will continue X, Y, and Z. You see, once COVID-19 becomes an issue that is relatively unimportant to the American public, and it's already started to do so with the vaccination efforts, trickling out, with many people starting to be fully vaccinated, with the rest of the country at a point where 50% of us have received one dose, where fully vaccinated is nearing the same numbers. The main takeaway is that COVID-19 will soon be a thing of the past for the American public. And while that may not necessarily reflect the true state of the pandemic on the international level, all that matters to the American public is what happens here in America. So, taking away the stimulus checks, that will become an absent thought in the eyes of many American voters, in the minds of these voters that are going to be pivotal for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party's success in 2022. Besides the COVID-19 stimulus checks and the package that was sent out, the $1 trillion package that was sent out through budget reconciliation, what else can Biden be named for? What else can they run on in terms of a major piece of legislation, a major accomplishment on the part of the Democratic Party? And that's where it gets tricky. You see, looking at these Biden promise trackers, there hasn't been so many promises that it's at a point where Joe Biden is certainly, on track to finish all of his promises. According to PolitiFact here, which is just the normal type of fact checker institute, they actually did a Trump promise tracker. I believe I showed it to you guys back in October or November. But the main thing is that Joe Biden seems to have only kept 12% of his promises so far. Now, I understand it. We are not fully done with his presidency. 38% of them are in the works. However, I do want to point out that in the works isn't enough for American voters. By the time we reach the midterm elections, at this rate, the promises kept will be at most 30-40%. Not 50% halfway through his term, but 30-40%. And it puts Biden and the Democrats in a very tricky position where, in that 12%, what can the American public note? Increased COVID-19 testing won't be super important. Resume ties with Palestinian Authority, not a major issue for the American public. Create a bipartisan commission to consider reforms to the Supreme Court maybe was important during the passing time period of Ruth Bader Ginsburg going into Amy Coney Barrett nominated to the Supreme Court, but certainly not a major issue for voters right now. The Supreme Court is not top in terms of the minds of the average American voter. Rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement? Not really. Climate change is a very important issue, I would say, but the American public probably doesn't view that as a more important issue than the economy or other types of things. The 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots, sure, it was a great promise that Biden was able to succeed and fulfill. That was a good sign for the direction of our country in terms of ending this virus, ending this pandemic in the United States as we know it. But again, will be an absent thing in the mind of an American voter in 2022. The small businesses restart package, pandemic-related openings, again, same thing. Prevent budget shortfalls, maybe. But again, these promises that are being kept, reverse the transgender military ban, certainly not a major issue for the American voter. Rejoin the World Health Organization. I mean, some of these things that Biden was able to do immediately and did do immediately isn't a major issue. It isn't a major accomplishment that Biden signed an executive order to just redo or undo something that President Trump did. I mean, it gets even worse than this when you're looking at some of the other promises. I mean, while he made 61 promises in the first 100 days, he only kept 28 of them. I mean, looking at some of these major promises, of course, he wasn't going to be able to complete all of them. No president ever does, but 28 out of 61 isn't even half. So what I expect to see from the Republican Party, which is what this Biden allied group is trying to say, that they will attack Biden for doing absolutely nothing. And while that won't be the case, and while that won't be something that is a reality, because of course there were pieces passed in the United States Senate, in the United States House of Representatives. I mean, DC statehood passed in the U.S. House, failed in the United States Senate. I mean, wouldn't even make it past a filibuster because you need 60 votes to end that. The infrastructure bill seems to be in a position where it's going to take either multiple votes or the Republicans simply won't be okay with the initial plan. I mean, everything that Biden needs to do and wants to do with this Democratic trifecta is being throttled single-handedly by the filibuster. And the American public is in a position where on certain issues they support reforming the filibuster. But the Democratic Party needs 50 votes to do that, and one person is already committed to being completely opposed to any type of change for the Senate filibuster. 15 are open to changes, 15 have committed themselves to changes, and 19 completely support eliminating the filibuster. But that isn't enough for many of these people. Because at this point in time, the Democratic Party is in a position where if they truly want to be able to win in the 2022 midterm elections, they need more than just blaming the Republicans with the filibuster to win. They need more than just the COVID-19 stimulus checks. When that was sent out, that was widely popular amongst the American public, but it seemed to be the bare minimum for Joe Biden. At this point in time, while he is a popular president, there isn't much that comes to mind when you think about his administration. And while we're, 5-6 months into it, there still needs to be more coming out of the White House. There needs to be more press releases, more bills put forth. Major pieces of legislation are crucial for a president to remain notable and remain popular. I mean, what do you remember most about Obama? Obamacare. That was a major legislative task that took 60 votes in the United States Senate, took a lot of votes in the United States House of Representatives. It was something that wasn't easily won on the behalf of the President of the United States at that time, Barack Obama. But Obamacare is this long-lasting name and this long-lasting health care plan that will be remembered for at least the next decade or two, and possibly throughout history. Obamacare has such a name where, you can write about that in history books, talking about the first step the American public really took, at least legislatively, not necessarily on a statewide or local level, to put forth a new type of healthcare reform. When there were other Democrats in the past, for example, even Hillary Clinton, who promoted certain types of healthcare that will now seen as the bare minimum, but were then seen as extreme. When that doesn't pass in the House of Representatives, when that doesn't pass in the United States Senate, people seem to forget about that. That's actually one thing that Hillary Clinton brought up in 2016, that her idea was of healthcare back in the 90s was very similar to Obamacare. And that it was called, jokingly saying it was called Clinton Care before it was called Obamacare. But the reality of the situation was, back into the 90s, the Democratic Party was nowhere near as okay with something of that stature. Today, they absolutely are. But that is forgotten in history, even though it seems that there were other people besides Hillary Clinton, with her included, that came up with similar ideas about how to tackle the healthcare crisis. But since it didn't pass, and since there wasn't any major bills put forth, or at least realistically put forth, the United States voter would forget about that. They wouldn't view that as a major point to vote for a certain candidate or not. So for Joe Biden in this position, while he may have all of these ideas, DC statehood, infrastructure, voting rights, gun control, X, Y, and Z, until something passes in the House, until something passes in the Senate, and he can sign it on his desk, it will not be notable. The American public can't say, I want to re-elect Democrats in a trifecta because I know they've been so effective. Because what we've seen so far is that they simply have not been as effective as they promised to be. And I get it. The American public is always sold onto these stories from politicians that if they are elected, things will be done the next day. If they are elected, there will be X, Y, and Z done. But the point is that both parties are in positions where they can be throttled by the United States Senate. But unfortunately for Joe Biden and the Democrats, it's their party being throttled by the filibuster. Because without that filibuster, there wouldn't even be this discussion about changing it. People would be able to pass whatever they wanted with this simple majority. And I'm sure the Democratic Party would have. But since they can't do that, the American public is in a position where they may be more inclined to vote for Republicans instead of Democrats in an effort to get more things done. Take a look at this. The latest polls of the generic ballot, the Democrats in their best position are up 9 points back in May of 2021. But in recent polls, McConnell and Associates puts the Republicans actually ahead by 1 point. Echelon Insights, Democrats are ahead by 4. RMJ Research, Democrats by 3. ALG Research, Democrats by 2. And Ipsos, Democrats by 7. But this is nowhere near what the Democrats were back in 2018 or 2020. What happened then was Democrats consistently leading by 7, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9. It became a pattern of sorts in which the Democratic Party was almost always winning the generic ballot by 7 points or higher. And looking at the generic ballot now, that simply is not the case. The American public is already starting to respond to these positions where Joe Biden and the Democrats are not following through with many of their promises. Looking at this Biden promise tracker on every single website, you'll see that most of his promises he made within the first 100 days were not accomplished. While there were many major things relating to COVID-19 and a number of executive orders on day number 1, he became throttled by the United States Senate. After reconciliation was used, they really had nowhere else to turn to. And without this filibuster in place, I'm sure the Democratic Party would be in a much more favorable position entering into 2022. If they truly could have delivered on what they promised, then they would have a very positive response. And while Joe Biden seemingly is popular right now, I want you to understand that a popularity rating of up 9.3% nationwide would not be enough for the Democrats to retain control of the House of Representatives in 2022. Redistricting and the off year or the midterm year will be enough to land that House majority in favor of the Republican Party. Things might change before then. I think that it certainly has the ability to, depending on Biden's approval rating. But right now, because there hasn't been much passing, Biden's approval rating is starting to dwindle. His approval rating amongst immigration is remaining negative. Amongst the economy is starting to falter. COVID-19 will no longer be a major issue that is questioned on these polls. So Biden at some point might not have much going for him, largely as a response to the Senate filibuster, preventing him from being able to pass anything major. And these pro-Biden groups, not just this one, but Unite the Country is the group that perform focus groups, according to Politico, in critical states, where they say that even those who do support Joe Biden, they can't name much about what he has done. They are looking at what has happened with Biden's administration, and many of them simply can't find much to point out. Maybe the jobs report is something that the Biden administration needs to promote more. Maybe there are other things that the Democratic Party should be doing in order to inform the general public of what Biden and his team are doing in the administration and in the United States House and United States Senate. But for right now, there simply isn't much for them to work with. And this could be that point where 2022 ends up in Republican control in the Senate and in the House because Biden and the Democratic Party can't do much else. With that filibuster in place, they are throttled. Not to say Republicans wouldn't be throttled by the Democratic Party as they were in years past, but we saw what happened in years past with Republican incumbent presidents. In 2018, Democrats won back control of the United States Senate. In 2020, they kicked out the incumbent president for the first time since 1988. They won back control of the United States Senate for the first time since 2014. So when voters don't think much is getting done, for Trump's example, you can't find much to pinpoint about him. Maybe his pre-election promises of building the wall, Well, that certainly was not completely done. There are certain points on the United States-Mexico border where there has been a raised fence, a metal one at that, but there hasn't been a wall built. Put Hillary Clinton in jail. That did not happen. Repeal and replace Obamacare. That did not happen. And, while you can use Trump as an example of how you can still remain politically relevant, you can't use him as an example as how you can be reelected with being put in such a position. If you're throttled, if you're unable to do many major things after Democrats took control of the House, the only thing Republicans really could do in 2017 through 2021, because they were either throttled by their own colleagues in the Senate or in the United States House of Representatives after Democrats took control. But the main thing is that what happened at that point was that Donald Trump was not able to recover from many major losses. After many promises that he made and made very notable on the campaign trail did not follow through, he lost the White House. He lost the House. He lost the Senate for the Republican Party. This is exactly what Biden wants to prevent. But it all comes down to whether or not they can actually get things done. Because if the American public goes into 2022 having no idea of what Biden did, or having to be told before the ballot box, they will be much less inclined to vote for someone who was entered in with a trifecta who still couldn't get much done. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 midterm election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.